You're about to hear a story of how one man's response to hatred changed everything. If you enjoy stories of justice conquering racism, subscribe to the channel. October 31st, 1955. Halloween night in Harlem. While children were trick-or-treating, 30 hooded figures in white robes gathered at Marcus Garvey Park, preparing to deliver a message of terror that would drive Bumpy Johnson out of New York forever. The Ku Klux Klan had been watching Bumpy's growing influence for months, and they'd decided that Halloween night would be the perfect cover for a demonstration that would show the black community what happened to anyone who got too powerful or too uppity in America. Their plan was simple and designed to maximize fear. Burn a massive cross on his front lawn while he and his family were home. Leave pamphlets promising violence against anyone who supported him. And disappear before police could respond. What the Klansmen didn't know was that Bumpy had been expecting their visit for weeks. He'd received intelligence about their planning meetings, knew several members' identities, and had prepared a response that would turn their night of terror into a lesson about what happens when organized hatred encounters strategic intelligence. But what did Bumpy Johnson do at 3 a.m. that made 30 armed racists flee Harlem and never return? How did he transform a symbol of intimidation into a demonstration of power that would be remembered for decades? And why did the KKK's attempt to terrorize one man result in the collapse of their entire New York operation? The answer reveals something about courage that most people never understand. Sometimes the most effective response to terrorism isn't fighting back. It's making the terrorists realize they've chosen the wrong target. To understand what happened on Halloween night 1955, you need to understand why the Ku Klux Klan believed they could intimidate Bumpy Johnson, and what made them think that burning a cross on his lawn would drive him out of Harlem. The KKK had been active in New York since the 1920s, but their influence had grown significantly in the early 1950s as black communities gained political and economic power that threatened white supremacist beliefs about racial hierarchy. Harlem, in particular, represented everything the Klan opposed: a thriving black community with successful businesses, influential leaders, and growing political representation. By 1955, Bumpy Johnson had become the most visible symbol of black success and independence in New York. He controlled significant business interests, had connections to legitimate political figures, and commanded respect throughout Harlem in ways that challenged every assumption the Klan held about racial superiority and social order. The KKK believed they could intimidate Bumpy Johnson because he represented everything they opposed: a successful black leader with political connections who commanded respect throughout Harlem, challenging their assumptions about racial hierarchy. Grand Dragon William Pierce, a 52-year-old construction contractor from Queens, had planned what he called Operation Cleansing with 30 members from across New York, believing that burning a cross would intimidate Bumpy into leaving and send a message to the black community about supporting independent leadership. October 30th, 1955. The planning meeting took place in the basement of Pierce's construction company, with 30 Klan members from Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx gathering to discuss the details of what they called Operation Cleansing. The plan was carefully coordinated and designed to maximize psychological impact. They would arrive at Bumpy Johnson's house at 11 p.m. on Halloween night, when the streets would be busy with trick-or-treaters, and their presence might be mistaken for Halloween costumes until it was too late for anyone to interfere. "This isn't just about one man," Pierce told his assembled followers. "This is about sending a message to every colored person in Harlem that there are limits to how far they can push before white America pushes back. After tomorrow night, Bumpy Johnson will understand that he's not as powerful as he thinks he is." What Pierce didn't know was that his own construction foreman, Thomas Murphy, had been secretly documenting Klan activities and reporting them to Bumpy Johnson for months. Murphy was a 45-year-old Irish immigrant who'd been disgusted by Pierce's racist activities but had continued working for him to gather information that could protect potential victims. October 31st, 1955, 6 a.m. Murphy called Bumpy Johnson and provided detailed information about Operation Cleansing, the time, the location, the number of participants, and the specific threats that would be delivered along with the cross burning. "Mr. Johnson," Murphy said, "they're planning something for tonight that's designed to scare you and your family out of New York. 30 men, armed, planning to burn a cross on your lawn at 11 o'clock. They think this will make you run." Bumpy Johnson's response was calm and thoughtful. "Thomas, thank you for the information. These men don't understand who they're dealing with, and after tonight they'll never make that mistake again." Bumpy spent the rest of Halloween Day preparing a response that would transform the Klan's intended night of terror into a demonstration of why organized hatred was no match for strategic intelligence and community solidarity. The first component of Bumpy's preparation involved gathering comprehensive intelligence on every Klansman who would participate in the cross burning. Using contacts throughout New York's law enforcement, political and business communities, Bumpy compiled detailed files on all 30 men, their real names, home addresses, employers, family members, financial situations, and personal vulnerabilities. The second component involved organizing a community response that would ensure the cross burning would be witnessed and documented by dozens of Harlem residents who understood the importance of creating a permanent record of terrorist activities that could be used for legal and social consequences. The third component was the most sophisticated. Bumpy arranged for trusted associates to be positioned at the homes and workplaces of all 30 Klansmen, ready to deliver personalized consequences that would make each terrorist understand the individual price of participating in organized hatred. By 6 p.m. on Halloween night, Bumpy Johnson had transformed what the KKK intended as a surprise attack into a carefully orchestrated trap that would destroy the lives of everyone who participated in it. October 31st, 1955, 10:30 p.m. 30 hooded Klansmen gathered at Marcus Garvey Park, carrying the materials needed for their cross burning: a pre-assembled 12-foot wooden cross, 5 gallons of gasoline, torches for ignition, and pamphlets threatening violence against anyone who supported black leadership in Harlem. Grand Dragon Pierce had chosen Halloween night specifically because the streets would be full of people in costumes, making it difficult for witnesses to distinguish between actual Klan members and Halloween revelers until the cross was already burning and the intimidation complete. The Klansmen moved through Harlem's streets in formation, confident in their numbers and convinced that their show of force would accomplish everything they'd planned: terrorizing Bumpy Johnson, intimidating the black community, and demonstrating white supremacist power in the heart of America's most successful black neighborhood. October 31st, 1955, 11 p.m. The 30 Klansmen arrived at Bumpy Johnson's residence and discovered that every light in the house was on, that Bumpy was standing calmly on his front porch as if he'd been expecting them, and that dozens of Harlem residents had gathered on nearby streets to observe. For a moment, the Klansmen hesitated. They'd expected to find a sleeping household that they could terrorize with surprise. Instead, they found a man who was clearly prepared for their arrival, and a community that seemed to be waiting for some kind of confrontation. But Pierce had committed too much planning and too much Klan prestige to the operation to back down now. He ordered his men to proceed with the cross burning, believing that their overwhelming numbers and willingness to use violence would intimidate any opposition. "Plant the cross and light it," Pierce commanded his followers. "Let's show this neighborhood what happens when colored people forget their place." The Klansmen planted their 12-foot cross on Bumpy Johnson's front lawn, soaked it with gasoline, and prepared to set it ablaze. As they worked, Bumpy remained on his porch, watching calmly, making no move to interfere or call for help. Pierce ordered his men to proceed, and they planted their 12-foot cross on Bumpy's lawn, soaked it with gasoline, and set it ablaze at 11:15 p.m. The cross burst into flames that illuminated the entire block, casting dancing shadows across the faces of both the hooded Klansmen and the growing crowd of Harlem residents who'd gathered to witness the confrontation. Pierce stepped forward and shouted, "This is what happens to uppity colored boys who think they can run their own neighborhoods. You've got 24 hours to leave New York." Bumpy Johnson's response was calm. "Gentlemen, I appreciate you taking the time to visit my neighborhood tonight. I have something to show you as well." That's when the Klansmen realized they'd made a fundamental miscalculation about who they were dealing with and what kind of response their intimidation tactics would provoke. As the cross burned, Bumpy walked slowly toward the 30 hooded figures, completely unarmed and unafraid. He wasn't shouting, wasn't displaying any of the fear or anger that the Klansmen had expected to provoke. He was simply walking toward them with the calm confidence of someone who held all the advantages in a situation that others might have seen as hopeless. "You know," Bumpy said conversationally, "I've been looking forward to meeting all of you face to face. We have so much to discuss." "You should be scared," Pierce shouted. "We've burned crosses for colored boys who didn't listen to warnings." Bumpy nodded thoughtfully. "Tell me, William, how many of those colored boys knew your real name, your address, your family members' names, and your business associates before you decided to threaten them?" The use of Pierce's real name shocked the Klansmen, who'd assumed their hoods provided anonymity. Bumpy smiled and withdrew a manila envelope from his jacket. "William Pierce, 52 years old, owner of Pierce Construction Company at 142 Northern Boulevard in Queens. Married to Dorothy Pierce. Father of 3 children. William Jr., age 16, Margaret, age 14, and Thomas, age 12. Home address 67, Maple Street, Astoria, Queens." The information was accurate and detailed, demonstrating that Bumpy had conducted thorough intelligence gathering on the Klan's leadership. But he wasn't finished. Robert McNamara, 38, electrician, lives at 89 Oak Avenue, Brooklyn. Thomas Sullivan, 45, postal worker, 134 Pine Street, Bronx. Joseph Ricci, 29, truck driver, 267 Elm Street, Queens. As Bumpy continued reading names and addresses of other Klansmen, they realized their anonymity had been completely compromised, that someone had been documenting their identities and personal information while they'd been planning their campaign of terror. "Now, gentlemen, let me tell you about your families, your employers, your neighbors, and your financial situations," Bumpy continued, his voice remaining calm and conversational. "Because after tonight, all of these people are going to learn some very interesting things about your evening activities." As the cross continued burning on his front lawn, Bumpy Johnson began revealing information that would destroy the lives of every Klansman who'd come to terrorize his family. "William, your wife Dorothy thinks you're attending construction industry meetings on Thursday nights. She doesn't know you're actually planning cross burnings and discussing which colored families to intimidate. How do you think she'll react when she finds out that her husband is a terrorist who threatens children?" Pierce's composure was beginning to crack, but Bumpy continued his systematic demolition of the Klansmen's secret lives. "Robert, you work for the New York City Department of Water Supply, which has a very strict policy against employees participating in hate groups. Your supervisor, Michael Cohen, will be receiving some interesting photographs tomorrow morning, showing you in that hood, along with documentation of your KKK membership. Thomas, you're a federal postal worker, which means your KKK activities violate federal employment regulations. The Postal Inspector's Office will be receiving a complete file on your participation in tonight's activities. As Bumpy worked his way through the list, providing specific personal consequences that each Klansman would face as a result of their participation in the cross burning, the men began to understand that they hadn't come to intimidate a victim. They'd walked into a trap that would destroy their jobs, their families, and their reputations. "Gentlemen, I want you to look around this neighborhood," Bumpy said, gesturing toward the crowd of Harlem residents who'd gathered to watch the confrontation. "Every person you see tonight has been documenting your presence here. Your license plate numbers, your physical descriptions, your voices. Everything is being recorded." The Klansmen began to notice what they'd been too focused on their intimidation tactics to see earlier. The crowd wasn't just watching passively. People were taking photographs, writing down information, and clearly documenting everything about the cross burning and the men who'd organized it. "Now, gentlemen, let me tell you what's going to happen. At 6 a.m. this morning, your employers will receive photographs proving you're members of a terrorist organization. Your wives will receive copies of tonight's footage. Your neighbors will learn they're living next to men who plan violence against families." But Bumpy's most devastating revelation was yet to come. "And at 3 a.m. this morning, each of you will receive a personal visit that will help you understand what it feels like when someone shows up at your home uninvited." November 1st, 1955, 3 a.m., across New York City. 30 Klansmen were awakened by knocks at their doors. But the visitors weren't who they'd expected. Instead of Bumpy Johnson's associates coming to deliver threats or violence, they found well-dressed community representatives carrying briefcases full of legal documents, photographs, and information that would change their lives forever. At William Pierce's house, the visitor was Thomas Murphy, his own construction foreman, who revealed he'd been documenting Klan activities for months. "William, I've been working for you for 3 years, and I've been disgusted by your racist activities for 3 years. Tonight was the last night you'll ever terrorize anyone in New York." Murphy handed Pierce photographs of every Klan meeting, recordings of conversations about targeting black families, and documentation of his terrorist activities. "Your wife will receive copies of these materials in the morning mail. Your business clients will receive them on Monday. The Better Business Bureau will receive them on Tuesday. By Wednesday, you'll understand what it means to have your life destroyed by someone who's been watching you, documenting your activities and planning your downfall." Similar scenes played out at all 30 homes. Each Klansman received documentation of his KKK activities and learned that people they'd trusted, neighbors, co-workers, family friends, had been secretly monitoring their terrorist planning. But the most powerful component of Bumpy's 3 a.m. response wasn't the legal documents or the photographic evidence. It was the psychological message that was being delivered to each Klansman individually. At Robert McNamara's house in Brooklyn, the visitor was his own next-door neighbor, Mrs. Sarah Goldman, an elderly Jewish woman who'd been secretly documenting his late-night departures and suspicious activities. "Robert," Mrs. Goldman said, as she stood on his doorstep, "I've been watching you for months, wondering why you left your house every Thursday night wearing different clothes and returning home smelling like gasoline. Tonight I finally learned what you've been doing with your evenings." She handed him a file containing photographs she'd taken of him, leaving his house on KKK meeting nights, along with copies of newspaper articles about cross burnings and terrorist activities that had occurred on the same dates. "Your children go to school with my grandchildren. Your wife borrows sugar from my kitchen. You've been living next to a Holocaust survivor while spending your evenings planning to terrorize other families because of their race. Tomorrow morning, everyone in this neighborhood will know what kind of man you really are." At Thomas Sullivan's house in the Bronx, the visitor was his own mail delivery supervisor, who revealed that the Postal Service had been investigating reports of employee participation in hate groups and had compiled extensive evidence of Sullivan's KKK activities. The pattern was repeated at every Klansman's home. They discovered that people they'd trusted, people they'd worked with, people they'd lived near, had been documenting their activities, and were prepared to destroy their reputations and their relationships with comprehensive evidence of their terrorist planning. November 1st, 1955, 6 a.m. As the sun rose over New York City, the consequences of the previous night's cross-burning began to unfold according to Bumpy Johnson's carefully orchestrated plan. Employers across the city received manila envelopes containing photographs, documents, and detailed reports, proving that specific employees were members of a terrorist organization that targeted families based on race. The evidence was comprehensive, professionally presented, and legally actionable. William Pierce arrived at his construction company to find that his largest client, the New York City Department of Public Works, had already canceled 3 major contracts and was conducting an investigation into his business practices and personal associations. Robert McNamara discovered that the New York City Department of Water Supply had placed him on administrative leave pending a full investigation into his violation of federal employment regulations prohibiting government employees from participating in hate groups. Thomas Sullivan found that the U.S. Postal Service had initiated termination proceedings against him for engaging in activities that violated the political neutrality requirements of federal employment. But the professional consequences were only the beginning of what the 30 Klansmen would experience as a result of their Halloween night terrorism. November 1st, 1955, 9 a.m. The wives and family members of the Klansmen began receiving their own manila envelopes, containing photographs of their husbands and fathers in KKK robes, transcripts of meetings where they'd planned terrorist activities, and detailed documentation of their participation in cross-burnings and intimidation campaigns. Dorothy Pierce opened her envelope while having breakfast with her 3 children and discovered photographs of her husband William in a KKK hood standing next to a burning cross, along with transcripts of meetings where he discussed teaching uppity colored boys their place through violence and intimidation. The accompanying letter explained that her husband had been the leader of terrorist activities targeting families with children, that he'd been planning violence against community members based solely on their race, and that his activities had put their own family at risk of retaliation and legal consequences. Similar revelations were destroying families throughout New York, as wives discovered that their husbands were terrorists. Children learned that their fathers were promoting racial hatred, and extended families confronted the reality that they'd been living with men who spent their evenings planning violence against innocent people. November 2nd, 1955. Newspapers throughout New York published detailed stories about the Halloween night cross-burning, complete with photographs of the participants, their real names and addresses, and comprehensive documentation of their KKK activities and terrorist planning. The New York Times headline read, "Local KKK cell exposed after failed intimidation attempt." The article included a complete list of the 30 participants, their employers, their neighborhoods, and the specific threats they'd made against Harlem families. The Daily News published photographs of each Klansman alongside their home addresses and places of employment, allowing readers to understand that terrorists weren't abstract figures in distant locations. They were neighbors, co-workers, and community members who'd been secretly planning violence. Local community newspapers in Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx published detailed stories about KKK members in their specific neighborhoods, providing residents with information about which of their neighbors had been participating in terrorist activities. The psychological impact on the exposed Klansmen was immediate and overwhelming. They discovered that anonymity and secrecy had been the foundations of their power, and without those protections they were vulnerable to the same kind of fear and social isolation they'd been trying to impose on others. November 3rd, 1955. The long-term consequences began unfolding as Pierce's business collapsed. His wife filed for divorce, and he faced criminal charges. McNamara lost his job and found no employer would hire him. Sullivan was terminated and faced federal charges. The pattern repeated for all 30 Klansmen. Their lives were systematically destroyed through legal, professional, social, and personal consequences. November 10th, 1955. Facing complete ruin, Grand Dragon Pierce announced the dissolution of KKK operations in New York and issued a public apology to the Harlem community. Bumpy Johnson taught us that you can't terrorize people who are smarter, better organized, and more committed to justice than you are. Pierce's statement read, "We came to intimidate one man and his family. Instead, we learned that we were the ones who should be afraid." December 15th, 1955. The last of the 30 Klansmen had left New York, driven out by the consequences of their terrorist activities. October 31st, 1955. The night 30 hooded terrorists learned that burning a cross on someone's lawn can destroy your own life if that someone understands how to turn symbols of hatred into weapons of justice. The night Bumpy Johnson proved that the most effective response to terrorism isn't fear or anger. It's strategic intelligence applied with precision that makes terrorists become victims of their own hatred. Some crosses burn to spread fear. Some crosses burn to reveal the identity of those who spread fear. And some crosses burn to teach communities that courage is more powerful than hatred, intelligence more effective than violence, and justice always triumphs over terrorism.